is dying. The CAS report revealed the horrors of medics chemically transitioning children and teenagers with horrific unproven medication like puberty blockers, which literally stop their bodies developing. The celebrities, politicians and public figures who liked to characterise the butchering of children as medical care or a health treatment have gone strangely quiet. And now the government is cracking down on the butchering not only of children's bodies, but the butchering of our language too. The NHS, which has gone so far down the trans ideology rabbit hole that its gender clinic, the Tavistock Centre, was literally closed down, is going to see changes to its constitution to set out patients' rights based on biological reality. Praise the Lord. Our increasingly bonkers health service will no longer refer to people with ovaries or birthing humans. They will be women again. Transgender women, that's males who identify as female, will no longer be treated in single-sex female hospital wards. Amazing that we had to ask for that. And patients will be given the right to request that intimate care, such as a smear test, is carried out by someone of the same biological sex. At the moment, a male with the full meat and two veg can call himself a girl and perform this intimate procedure. Make it make sense. Now, Labour, whose own leader, Sir Keir Starmer, can't even define what a woman is, even though he's married to one, would surely love to undo all of this. But they, even they, are coming to grips with the huge public backlash against all of this nonsense. Even though Labour have been cheerleaders for mad trans ideology and treating heroic Labour MP Rosie Duffield so badly for stating biological facts, the shadow front bench have stopped chanting the insane mantra that trans women are women. They are not. No more than I am Celine Dion. Now, don't get me wrong, I can carry a tune and I speak a bit of French, but let's not get carried away. Public irritation with this woke crap has reached a tipping point. People are sick of trigger warnings on books and films, sick of being lectured about the crimes of our past when they visit a museum, an art gallery or a stately home. They're sick of classic TV comedies being removed from public view and being told, as they were this week, that the delightful sitcom Terry and June is offensive. The public don't want to axe Rule Britannia from last night at the proms, which just this week the Guardian newspaper called divisive and inappropriate. Of course they did. The public are sick of being told that our country's history is shameful and something to apologise for, even though we gave the world representative democracy, the market economy, the English language, art, technology, innovation, finance and an end to slavery. The public are sick of our society being divided up into racial, cultural or religious groups. They want this country to be one community, one group, one nation. And how do you do that? How do you achieve that? Well, you get everyone to love the United Kingdom. You sing songs like Rule Britannia. You wave the flag, not the Palestinian one, the British one. You teach everyone to adopt British values whilst embracing the diverse melting pot society that Britain always has been and always will be. I am a child of immigrants myself, and proudly so. The public are sick of climate hysteria and being told the planet will have burned down by next Tuesday. Most people are happy to see this country become green and sustainable, to get emissions down and protect our precious planet. But not by wrecking the economy or our way of life, with people being made colder and poorer, whilst China, Russia, India and Brazil burn fossil fuels for fun. By the way, whatever happened to that long-predicted, unseasonably hot April? I was going to get the long johns out today. It was freezing. Prejudice of any sort is abhorrent. Prejudice is real and it needs to be tackled. But the public are sick of everything being about race, sexual orientation and gender, which places people into political identity groups rather than bringing us together. Identity politics is divisive and deliberately so, and goes explicitly against Martin Luther King's dream of a colourblind society. Is it too much to ask that we should all be lifted up together rather than penned off into cultural silos? And of course, it's now woke to support increasingly aggressive pro-Palestinian marches, which are leaving Jews afraid to live in their own country, and which this weekend saw a monument commemorating the Holocaust covered up in plastic sheets for fear that folks on these so-called peace marches would attack it. What a time to be alive. Woke progressives want to build a joyless, politically correct, anti-Western, anti-British, anti-science, illiberal, intolerant, insane dystopia. But they are losing the battle. Woke won't win, but it won't die without a fight. Your reaction, gbnews.com/your say. I'll get to your comments shortly, but first, tonight's top pundits. I'm delighted to welcome a brand new star on Mark Dolan tonight, Communications Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Reem Ibrahim. GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson, and former Conservative MP, thank God he's out. He's happy to be out of the House of Commons. He's now on his farm, Neil Parish. Great to see all three of you. Reem, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
First of many appearances, I hope. Now, Reem, tell me your reaction to this news that the NHS are going to stop butchering the English language and restore the principle of biological sex.
Well, I'm not sure why it didn't happen sooner. I think what's really interesting about this particular story is, of course, many women across the country and many men have been arguing that biological reality is a fact and that these kind of woke ideologies shouldn't be permeating public institutions. Now, unfortunately, they have been permeating public institutions. And the reason for this is because our legal structures have effectively allowed this to happen. We saw in 2019, Thames Valley Police said that anybody that was to reproduce the Oxford English Dictionary definition of what a woman is, an adult human female, could face criminal charges. This is in a country that we claim is free, that we claim we protect freedom of expression, and yet these kind of ideologies that are A, harmful to women, but B, are not helpful to any kind of minority, are continuously permeating public institutions. I'm glad that now something is happening, and clearly the anti-woke brigade are finally winning.
And why is it important as a woman that the NHS understands the importance of biological sex? Why does it matter to you that the literature around menopause and talk about sort of, you know, people with cervixes and people with ovaries? Why is it important to you?
Well, effectively what we're seeing with this kind of woke ideology is the erasure of women. And we're talking about things like, for example, if I was to one day hopefully have a child on the NHS, I would be told that I'm a chest feeder rather than a breastfeeder. I would be told that I'm going for an ovary swim because I'm a person with ovaries rather than a woman. And I think it really is about erasing the language around what female identity really looks like.
And what about female-only wards? Because at the moment, the loophole is that a trans woman can go into a female-only ward. Why is that a concern to you or other women?
Well, look, I mean, there is a reason why we have female-only spaces, and this goes, you know, from when it comes to competitive sports, but also in terms of, you know, male and female toilets. There are reasons for this, and it's because men are physically, biologically stronger than women, and so women have to be protected when they're in these vulnerable spaces. For example, when they're in hospitals, when they're in these female-only wards. The reason for that is because women need to feel respected. Now, again, I'm not saying that all men are predators or all men are dangerous, or even indeed that trans people, you know, are all a threat to women. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I am saying women need to feel safe in these instances, and there's a reason why we segregate the genders in the first place.
Although the NHS, with this language about people with cervixes and all the rest of it, Neil Parish, are trying to be inclusive. It's an ever-changing world, and there are trans people out there. Perhaps the NHS should be accommodating them.
No, I don't believe they should, Mark. I think that the public are really keen that we actually recognise a woman and we recognise a man. And if you want to be transsexual, fine. But why have we got to change all the language around what we've used? You know, I think a woman is proud to be breastfeeding and have breasts. Why shouldn't we say that? And the idea that you've got to chest feed in the future, I think is madness. I also think, you know, I mean, being a farmer, let's be blunt about it.
How do your cows...
If you don't have a womb, you are not going to produce a child.
Right.
And all of these things have just got crazy. And I think, you know, if you talk to my neighbours and friends and everybody you talk to, they really have had enough of this, which has become, I think, a sort of... It's been captured by a few people because, you know, I'm actually happy for people to be whatever sexuality they want to be. But what they shouldn't do is dictate the language to a woman, to a man. We can have our language as we've known it and be recognised for what we are and then recognise other people for what they are, transsexual or whatever. But, you know, why have we got to be so... And also, if we use the wrong pronouns, all of these things, I mean, it's become... I mean, if I was in politics now in Parliament, you'd wonder what you could say, and it didn't really stop me from saying a lot when I was there. But seriously, it's come to a stage now where you really got to look at what you say before you say it, and I think that's wrong.
Nigel Nelson, some trans people watching or listening to this programme will be very upset by these changes to the NHS constitution. They will feel excluded.
Well, I mean, some of it actually, I think some of them would welcome it because the whole point is that by having women-only spaces, in other words, single-sex wards, it means that they can be offered private rooms instead if that's what they want. So, in a sense, they could benefit from this. I mean, the whole point here is that a trans woman is a woman. That is the official position in this country.
Well, that's not Labour's position now. Wes Streeting, the Shadow Health Secretary, has backed away from that.
Well, not quite backed away. He said he wouldn't...
He said it's more complicated than that. And
it is complicated.
I'm going to stop saying trans women and women. So why are you still saying it, Nigel
Because
Nelson?
It's true. Because
you are the official spokesperson for the Labour Party. You're their mouthpiece. You're like a friendly Alistair Campbell.
That's right. You see, I just don't...
Well, let Nigel tell us why he's going to stick to that hellish mantra.
Because it is the legal official position in this country that if you have...
Not the scientific position, is it?
Well, you cannot change biological sex, but you can change your gender. And the Gender Recognition Act, which actually needs updating, and things like this are part of that updating.
Green.
What I will say is he is right that currently, under legal definitions, a trans woman is legally a woman. They have all of the same rights as a biological woman does. Does that mean that I believe that trans women are women? I mean, I don't necessarily think that our particular opinions matter individually. I think all adults should be entirely free to do as they wish with their own bodies. What they can't do is tell me what my definition is.
Dictating to the rest of us.
Nigel, you're one of the most experienced journalists in the country. How can you say, with your hand on your heart, that trans women are women? You're the arbiter of truth.
Because that is the position...
That's fantasy.
That is the position under British law.
But is it your position, Nigel?
And my position is the same.
And the law is wrong.
My position is exactly the same. That
that's on your positions.
You cannot change biological sex, but you can change your gender.
I tell you, what has got into Nigel Nelson this evening? I tell you, listen, Nigel's entitled to his view, because let me tell you, Mark Dolan tonight is the home of diverse opinion. So what's yours? gbnews.com/your say. My brilliant pundits are back shortly, but next up in the big story, as a row grows between London and Dublin, should the UK take back migrants who have left the UK and headed to Ireland? I'll be asking politics legend Neil Hamilton next.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Children's stories like Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland now come with a trigger warning at universities, alerting readers to possible themes of white supremacy.
Yes, these warnings are being applied to colonial narratives. That's the claim, commonly found in adventure stories and famous novels from the Victorian era. Well, joining us now is the actor Charlie Lawson. And Charlie, these warnings have been applied to Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland. What's this university getting at?
Well, look, first of all, this is nothing new. We hadn't heard about it for a while. Universities have been doing this over the last couple of years. I remember having a chat with one of your colleagues. But when Gabriella, the lovely Gabby, phoned me up today, I had to beg her to put me on after 9 o'clock because I found myself getting rather irate about the whole thing. But I will do my best to be very polite.
Yes, keep it clean.
Yes, look, which is quite difficult for me, as you'll appreciate, over this subject. Look, this is universities just jumping on the same trying to be relevant bandwagon. Is it any wonder that we look at the quality of graduates from university, and in my humble opinion, some of them are slightly disappointing. But I did phone a couple of people I knew who had sons and daughters at various leading universities, and they had been speaking this morning. And thank the Lord, they think it's a complete load of bloody nonsense, as I do. Give the C.S. Lewis Centre a ring in East Belfast, because that's where your man came from. And I think you'll find you'll get short shrift, because we're not all about that in East Belfast. We don't censor anything.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, a very nuanced response to my big opinion from Nick. Of course, my big opinion was all about the fact that the NHS is going to get rid of woke language. Women will be women again. They're not going to be chest feeders or people with ovaries. And Nick, who is a GB News member, has messaged the show and says, Mark, a trans person lives as a woman, and I have no problem with that. But living as a woman does not make you a woman. End of. OK, brilliant stuff. How about this from Dennis? Poor Nigel Nelson, your pundit. It's all crumbling around him, as it surely will also for his mate Starmer. And finally, Megan says, Mark, pronouns relate to sex, not dress or attire. OK, thanks, folks. Look, I'll get to more of your messages shortly. Lots and lots to get through, let me tell you, in what's going to be a very busy show. But let's talk now about a diplomatic row brewing between Dublin and London, as Ireland plans to return asylum seekers to the UK under new emergency laws. Simon Harris, the Taoiseach, has asked for proposals to be brought to Cabinet next week after concerns were raised that the UK's Rwanda plan had already caused an influx of asylum seekers. Now, I'll be tackling this story in my Take at 10. You won't want to miss it. I'll be dealing with the Irish Taoiseach in no uncertain terms. And I'm a paddy, so I won't pull my punches. But first, let's take a look at the legal and political implications of this in the company of the leader of UKIP, former Tory MP and lawyer Neil Hamilton. Neil, good to see you. Are we obliged to take these migrants back?
No, certainly not. They're illegal immigrants to the United Kingdom to start with, if they come here. And the Irish government has no power to return them to our shores. So, I mean, I think this is a highly amusing situation because under Leo Varadkar, the last Taoiseach, of course, Ireland basked in its own moral superiority. And, of course, he weaponised the Irish border between the south and the north and refused to have any concept of border controls. So now the Irish have got what they wished for. And I think we should send every single illegal immigrant to Britain over to Newry or somewhere like that so that they can walk across the border and seek sanctuary in the place where they'll be totally safe. Because after all, if the United Kingdom isn't safe for asylum seekers, it would be quite wrong for us to accept them in their own interests.
Well, Neil, it is ironic, isn't it, that Ireland want migrants returned to their first safe country of arrival. If only the French took the same view.
Well, indeed. And of course, it was the Dublin Agreement of the EU which established this principle in the first place. But now Dublin seems to have rejected its own named agreement. But this just points up the total hypocrisy of governments all over the place, where they want to escape their own responsibility for the migration catastrophe which has now engulfed us all. And there is no solution to this problem unless we take a sort of united position that we control access to actually the whole of Europe at the minute, because the whole continent is being besieged by the rest of the world, from Africa and from Asia. And the numbers of people who want to come to the West for very obvious reasons, that they get a much better life here materially and in other ways as well, then we simply can't cope with the numbers. But countries like Ireland in the past, of course, have felt that they were immune from these problems. Yeah. And now they are facing it themselves. Of course, they're having to face up to reality for once.
They've been drinking the woke Kool-Aid and they don't like the taste of it. Is this diplomatic row proof that the Rwanda plan could actually work?
Well, in a perverse way, it could, except that they go to Ireland rather than Rwanda. I don't care where they go, so long as they're not in the United Kingdom.
How do you see this playing out? This will embolden Rishi Sunak, won't it?
Well, you know, Rishi Sunak is a complete weakling, I think. I don't think the Rwanda plan is actually going to make that much difference in the grand scheme of things. I'm very happy to try it, but I don't think that the numbers that can be sent to Rwanda are going to make any real difference in the short or indeed even the medium term. The big elephant in the room, which Sunak has utterly failed to grapple with, is that because of the European Convention on Human Rights and the UN Refugee Convention, then we can't be a sovereign country controlling our own borders, and nor actually can any signatory of those agreements. And so until we recognise the reality that these agreements were signed 3/4 of a century ago in a completely different world, and they're not fit for the purpose today, then there's going to be no legal answer to this problem. So I think that Britain should leave both of them, and we'll control our own borders as an independent nation. Yes, we want to give sanctuary to genuine asylum seekers, but overwhelmingly they are bogus, the ones who are landing up on our shores.
Last but not least, Neil, when do you anticipate will be the date of the next general election? There's talk in the Sunday papers today of a snap July poll. What do you think?
Well, I think that's very unlikely, because the Tories are turkeys at the minute, and Christmas is probably likely to be the best time when they're slaughtered.
There you go, they'll get their stuffing. Neil, look forward to catching up soon. Send our best to Christine as well. My thanks to the leader of UKIP, former Tory MP and lawyer Neil Hamilton. Coming up with tonight's top pundits, as it's announced that Prince Harry will return to the UK for the Invictus Games next month. Should he receive a hero's welcome? We'll be debating that next.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We hold on to rather mixed weather conditions across the UK during the week ahead. Rain at times, but temperatures will also be on the rise. At the moment, low pressure's in charge, sitting out towards the east of the UK. This weather front bringing outbreaks of rain towards the northeast of the UK, coupled with fairly brisk winds too. And certainly as we head through the evening, a pretty wet end of the day across the far northeast of Scotland. And we do hold on to outbreaks of rain across the Northern Isles through the night. Elsewhere there'll be some clear spells, but notice showers moving in from the west, starting to give way to some more persistent rain across the far west of the UK by the morning on Monday. Temperatures will turn quite chilly under the clear slots towards the north and east. We could see a touch of frost briefly, but elsewhere it's a relatively mild night. As we go into Monday, we'll see an east-west split, outbreaks of rain in the west, moving in across northern areas during the day too, whereas out towards the east and southeast we'll see the best of the dry and often fairly sunny weather. And in the sunshine, it will be warmer than in recent days, up to 16 or 17 degrees, held back a little bit towards the north and northwest with those showers at 12 or 13 Celsius. On Tuesday, we'll see further outbreaks of rain out towards the west. Again, some of that could be quite hefty in nature. Further east, there'll be some sunshine and just 1 or 2 showers, particularly across the east and southeast of England. And again, those temperatures will be a little bit higher still. Could see high teens in a few spots. It does stay quite changeable weather-wise for the rest of the week, but notice those temperatures hold up too. Could see 19 or 20 degrees in a few spots, certainly from Wednesday onwards. That's it from me. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
GB News is Britain's election channel. And from Thursday, the 2nd of May,
the people decide.
As the country heads to the polls in a rush of elections.
We'll take you through the night as the first results come in.
And we'll pick up at breakfast
with the very best guests and analysis.
And on the weekend, the results won't stop, and neither will we.
We'll explore what it all means for you as we look ahead to the general election.
Continuing coverage live from Thursday, the 2nd of May at midnight on GB News.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Another royal development today, and it's been revealed that the Duke of Sussex will return to the UK in just over a week's time to mark the 10th anniversary of the Invictus Games. Prince Harry will attend a special Thanksgiving service at St Paul's Cathedral on the 8th of May, where he will also recite a poem. So how should the King's son be greeted by the British public? Should he have a hero's welcome? Let's ask my top pundits, Reem Ibrahim, Neil Parish and Nigel Nelson. What do you think? Should we roll out the red carpet for Harry?
No, but we should welcome him. So no to a hero's welcome, but the Invictus Games has been his baby for 10 years. Mm-hmm. It is the 10-year anniversary. He's coming here for a Thanksgiving service at St Paul's. All of that is absolutely right. The only thing I would say is that the British public shouldn't pay for any security, and he's lost his High Court battle on that one, so they won't anyway.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I don't agree. I actually think that Prince Harry should have top royal security, and the reason why is because even though he left the country and moved to America, it wasn't his choice to be the King's son, was it?
No, but the whole thing there is that it's the working royals who get that at taxpayers' expense. He's not a working royal. What the police will do is assess any kind of threat towards him, which is fine, which is what they should do. They do it for any one of us, if any one of us was under threat. But on that basis, he shouldn't automatically get police protection at taxpayers' expense. If he wants to pay for it himself, that's fine.
Well, I think he should get it for nothing. It's one aspect of Harry's life that I tend to agree with his position. What do you think, Neil?
I mean, I think, as has been said, in the Invictus Games, I think he's been absolutely marvellous. I think the trouble with Harry and Meghan in particular is that they've sniped so much at the royal family that I think people have sort of probably not quite forgiven him for that. And so, again, not a hero's welcome, but let's welcome him. I think you'll find the police will look after him fairly well. Yeah. I don't believe that you'll have Prince Harry here and there is no protection.
Wandering around the Tesco Express.
No, exactly. So, and I think you'll find it's like when, we had more threats as MPs. All of a sudden, I would be walking perhaps at the Remembrance Parade, and there would be a police around me or not too far away from me, and you'll find that there will be people watching him and keeping
what they would call de facto protection.
And so therefore, I think, I think because the High Court case has been heard and he's lost it, I don't think they're going to reinstate full royal protection, but there will be protection. And I think, let's hope that the King is suffering from cancer. It's a moment now, I think, to bring them all back together. And dare I say it, if Harry turns up without Meghan, it might be a lot easier. But I didn't say that, did I?
Well, I think that's a really interesting point. And again, look, the royal family have gone through so much over the last few years, not just with the Queen's death, but also with Kate Middleton, Princess Kate, and her cancer treatment. I honestly wouldn't blame the royal family themselves, depending on each British individual. If they actually say when Prince Harry is here, I don't want to see him, I honestly wouldn't blame them at all. I don't think we should be giving him a hero's welcome. I also don't think we should be welcoming him with open arms. I think that he needs to face the consequences for the kind of damage.
It would be hard to cheer him, wouldn't it, on the street?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the damage he caused, but also the way in which he strained relationships within the royal family, airing dirty laundry publicly, I think is a huge no-no. And ultimately, I think Neil makes an excellent point. Maybe if he's here without Meghan, he might actually be more inclined to make amends with the royal family. But I don't blame them if they don't want to.
There are some people, ex-veterans and former military heroes who are not happy with the Invictus Games and feel that Harry, having founded it, has now tainted it by making it all about him, plus his book, Spare, in which he brags about killing Taliban fighters, which has endangered the safety of some of his former military colleagues.
Yeah, this is a really interesting point, actually. I think the Invictus Games itself and what it was founded to do is to, not only celebrate, but also encourage many of those people that have, again, fought for our country, fought for the freedoms that we value so much, and actually protecting them. Many of them face mental health issues after, and they find it very, very difficult to re-enter public life and re-enter civilian life. And so I think they do excellent work. But actually, the fact of the matter is, Harry himself has made it a little bit of a personality flaw, a little bit about him. I think that the details in the book Spare themselves, I mean, many people have said that it's then put other people in danger as well. I think it's an interesting point to make. I also think that Prince Harry himself needs to, I think, be a little bit more humble, not just with regard to his own status as a veteran, but also with regard to the way he treats the royal family.
I think Prince Harry has been very genuine in his support for the Invictus Games, and I think when you see him, you can see that. I think the trouble was, I think some of it was naivety, and much of it was about making sure you had the right story so it would run. And I think he got sort of very much involved.
He does need to simmer down, though, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
He needs to be a bit more humble.
I agree with you, and I think he does. But I think the Invictus Games is Harry. I think we should have him here.
But it shouldn't be Harry, should it? It should be about the veterans.
Yeah, the Invictus Games should take centre stage for this whole thing. Harry is the patron of it, but he's not the Invictus Games.
He's not, but I think he has actually done a great deal in actually bringing it to our attention.
Well, listen,
the amount of injuries that we...
Neil Parish, I know you're holding out for the knighthood. And never say never. But listen, and you've been practising, you've fallen to your knees on more than one occasion just to get ready for that moment. But listen, 2,000, the line here, I've got the news line, 2,000 ex-military have left the Invictus Games as it has lost its original meaning to help those wounded, physically or mentally damaged, and it's become too much a stage for Harry and particularly Meghan. Many want Harry to step down, Neil Parish.
Interesting that, and I take your point entirely. I think you'll find, I still think that Harry has been very genuine in his support for it. I think again, I think the Meghan bandwagon has taken over. And I would actually say that we've got to re-emphasise as a government and as a country to make sure we do help all of those that have suffered in military service, because that's where, when it happens at the time, we remember, and when it's brought up, we remember, and then perhaps after a while it goes back onto the back burner. And I think that's probably a wake-up call for all of us to give more help to those that need it.
Those that need it. Nigel, do you think that Harry has made the Invictus Games about himself and turned it into a PR exercise?
I don't, actually. I mean, the whole thing is that certainly he's the figurehead, and as a result of that, and because of who he is, he's the one who gets the most media interest whenever he appears attached to the Invictus Games. But the Invictus Games itself will carry on long after Harry isn't
and it wouldn't exist without him.
Well, that's the point.
Or have that profile.
That's the point. So I think that the people who are actually saying, oh, Harry's using it as his own platform, are being unfair to Harry, given what he's done. And a lot of this isn't his fault. The media is inevitably going to focus on it.
Surely we should listen to the 2,000 veterans that have said, hold on, I don't feel represented. I don't feel as though the Invictus Games does represent me. I don't feel as though that they actually are talking about the key issues like PTSD, like mental health illnesses, after becoming a veteran and after after leaving and actually entering civilian life. We should listen to them.
I think you're right, but that's very much about the service we provide for those that have been injured. I don't think directly about what Harry has done.
Well,
Prince Harry is very much actually taken on.
I hear you, but I think what Reem's hinting at there is that the headlines from the Invictus is all Harry, Harry, Harry.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where it's gone, but it certainly didn't start like that, and he certainly put a huge amount of effort, and he put a lot of himself into it, because you had to watch all those interviews. They weren't, he very much felt for those that had suffered. Yeah. And I think that is what people very much saw, and I think most of us actually thought that was really a very good role for Prince Harry. Yeah. And I think the trouble is, I think with the leaving Britain, with the Meghan situation, with everything else going on, I think, unfortunately, the Invictus Games has been caught in this. But I would still defend. I don't always defend Prince Harry, but on this occasion, I would, as far as the Invictus Games.
Well, that knighthood is safe.
No, I don't think it's ever coming.
At the very least, an MBE. Do you know what? Service to farming and public life. Reem, just a couple of seconds. You'll be no doubt aware of the story, the biblical story of the Prodigal Son.
Yes.
And the young lad goes away and does what he needs to do, and the family miss him, and they don't hear from him for years or whatever. And he finally comes back, and rather than being bitter and angry, they just welcome him home and with a big hug and give him everything he needs. Do we need to do that? Does Britain need to forgive Harry?
It's up to Britain ourselves. I mean, if Harry needs to win us back. I think Harry needs to win back the trust of the British public. He effectively aired all of the dirty laundry that he had within the royal family publicly. He shamed the royal family. He shamed the late Queen effectively for her own handling of the situation with Meghan. And I think that actually him leaving was a good thing. If he wants to win back the trust of the British public, he's got to do that himself.
OK, there you go. Earn our trust, says Reem Ibrahim. Coming up in my Take at 10, looking forward to this. The Rwanda plan hasn't even started yet, but it's already working. More on that in the next hour. Plus, I'm looking forward to my Mark Meets guest. He's written 4 volumes about Brexit. We'll do that next.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
It's the first time we've had an admission from someone who at least used to be very senior in the party, saying that this election is not about winning, really, for the Conservatives now. It's about mitigating the losses.
There is broad recognition that this election has already been lost and that it's about damage limitation. And it is really important because it's the difference between whether, if Labour win a slim majority, then the fight is on for the next election. I know it seems silly to look 5 years ahead, but it does make a difference, versus basically accepting that we have 10 years of Labour government ahead.
Having an acknowledgement that the Tories are going to lose and lose badly, disastrously maybe, having that acknowledgement coming from somebody so senior is very demoralising for everybody else in the party, but also doesn't it make it then look rather immoral for them to just drag on right through to maybe November?
Personally, I think Rishi Sunak should name the date now. I think he should name it for October or November.
In terms of reform, if they're only 4 points behind the Conservatives in the latest poll, do we need to stop the narrative, which we have been using legitimately, saying, well, they're doing all right in the polls, but they won't win any seats? Do we need to change that perspective now?
I think it's really difficult to say. It depends on Reform's electoral strategy. There's a lot of evidence that in certain parts of the country with certain demographics, they do have a really good chance. So I think if they target seats in the Red Wall and other places where there's big disillusionment with the Conservatives and what they'd promised, I can't imagine that Reform are at the stage where they could take masses of seats. It's more about that portion of the vote that they'll be taking away that I think is going to result in that massive Labour landslide.
I'm Andrew Doyle.
Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Tom Harwood. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Coming up in my take at 10, in just 15 minutes' time, the Rwanda plan hasn't even started yet, but seems to be working. More on that in 15 minutes' time, but first, Mark Meets. Yes, it's time for Mark Meets, an astonishing 8 years on from that fateful vote in 2016, which saw a slim but decisive majority take Britain out of the European Union. Brexit remains an issue which divides the country. Some celebrated our reclaimed sovereignty, the trade deals, no payments to the bloc and national self-determination, whilst others mourn the cultural and economic impact of our divorce from the continent. So has Brexit been a triumph or a disaster? We may never know the answer, but to find out how we got here, who better to speak to than my Mark Meets guest this evening, Sunday Times political journalist and a man who has plotted our Brexit journey fastidiously across 3 best-selling volumes, the latest of which, No Way Out, From the Backstop to Boris, is out now. Tim Shipman, welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. We'll kick off with the beginning of this latest tome. The year is 2017. Theresa May is the Prime Minister. Is she the right person to get Brexit across the line?
I think the ultimate conclusion of having written about this for 6 years and having endured Theresa May's premiership for twice as long as she did is that the answer is probably no to that question mark. I think what I've kind of worked out studying the British political class for the last 8 years is that you need someone, particularly when you're confronted with a massive kind of conundrum like Brexit, a political problem to be solved, essentially. You need to know where you're going, you need to know how you're going to get there, and you need to have some ability to take people with you. And I think it's arguable that Theresa May at various points lacked all 3 of those attributes. And as you say, the book starts at the end of 2017 when she signed up to what they called the Joint Report, which was the thing that created the Northern Ireland backstop. And at the time, it looked like she just had to do that to keep going, to remain as Prime Minister, to clear the hurdle and get into the substantive talks. But that, of course, was an arrangement that then hung around her neck, frankly, from that moment until the moment she left Downing Street 18 months later. And a week after that, 6 days after that, she gave a vote to MPs on the Brexit deal, a meaningful vote, and we had 3 of those going forwards, and she didn't win any of them. And those 2 moments, frankly, which arrived in part because she'd spent the previous year and a half not really quite knowing where she was going, that meant that the rest of her premiership was kind of trying to get out of the hole that she dug herself with those 2 events.
And how much of Theresa May's problem, Tim, was parliamentary arithmetic, and how much of it was an issue around her political skills?
Well, look, I think the one heightened the need for the other. And lots of people who worked for Theresa May, when I was researching this book, I spoke to 260-odd people, including 40 people who worked in Downing Street. And a lot of them would say, oh, it was terribly difficult and we had this parliament that was against us. And it was a structural problem for whoever had been Prime Minister. The country had voted to leave, but 70% of MPs wanted to remain. And that shaped what they were prepared to vote for and all the rest of it. But don't forget that arithmetic was kind of created by Theresa May. She was the one who called the 2017 general election and did not perform well in it and lost the majority that David Cameron had eked out. So either way, it was kind of her fault. But she, I think, if she'd been a better leader, if she'd worked out where she was going earlier, I think the country was there to be led. People didn't have terribly firm views about what it would all look like. And instead, she took an age to work out what was going on. Her cabinet didn't even have a view until July of 2018. That was 2 full years after the referendum. And the scheme she'd come up with this kind of hybrid half in, half out idea that was known as the Chequers deal, and then became part of it, became the basis of the deal she finally signed with the EU. I think she liked it. Oliver Robbins, who was a negotiator, did a very good job of getting a version of what she wanted. But the problem was she hadn't taken anybody with her, and it wasn't really what half her cabinet wanted. It certainly wasn't what most of her backbenchers wanted. And in the end, it wasn't really what the EU wanted either. So she managed to sort of satisfy nobody, and then spent another sort of 6 or 7 months trying to get people to vote for it. And it frankly required someone a good deal more persuasive than her to get them to go with those ideas.
Do you think that the Remain establishment effectively lost twice, because they lost that fateful vote in 2016, which they probably should have won because, you know, most of the House of Commons wanted Remain. The media was largely behind Remain, but it happened. Do you think that they lost a second time by rejecting Theresa May's deal, which ultimately led to a much harder Brexit?
I think that's a perfectly arguable point. I mean, my book opens with the quote from Otto von Bismarck about politics being the art of the possible. But what nobody seems to understand is that there's a second line. It's the art of the attainable, the art of the next best. And basically saying you need to compromise and you need to try and get most of what you want rather than all of what you want. And I think various of the groups, both on the sort of hard Brexit side and on all the different groups that I call the resistance, the people who wanted a referendum, the people who wanted a customs union, the people who wanted a kind of Norway-style arrangement, all of them had a chance to get together and form some kind of majority in the House of Commons for a softer Brexit than the one we ended up with. But they were so stubborn, they refused to vote for everybody else's their second or third favourite options. And on 2 occasions, the House of Commons was given a kind of, multiple choice vote, one with 8 options and one with 4, and the vast majority of those were different versions of soft Brexit, and on each occasion they voted down all of them, and frankly a lot of those people have only got themselves to blame.
Tell us about Boris's role in your 3rd volume, 2017 to 2019. What did he get up to? Of course, he was appointed Foreign Secretary by Theresa May. Was that a mistake?
I don't think it was necessarily a mistake, but she appointed Boris Johnson, David Davis and Liam Fox, the 3 Brexiteers as they were known, to try and give her government some sort of make it look like a Brexity government. But then, of course, she froze them all out and didn't really give them a say in what actually was going to happen. And so Boris Johnson got more and more frustrated. He kept trying to persuade Theresa May to do things in a certain way. I mean, arguably, he should have resigned over the joint report, but he thought it was a highly technical thing that people wouldn't really understand. Obviously, he and Davis then quit over the Chequers agreement in July of 2018. And from that point onwards, this book tells the story of Boris Johnson gradually putting together his leadership team and getting the support of a lot of those people in the European Research Group, the ERG, and secretly meeting up with Dominic Cummings, who eventually goes into Downing Street with him, something that was kept very quiet at the time. And then, he's sort of involved in all the dramas in Parliament. He eventually supports May's deal on the 3rd vote, I think, as much as anything, to make it look like he was kind of trying to be responsible and attract some of the kind of moderate Brexiteers and some of the Remainers, because by that stage he knew he was going to be running for the leadership pretty soon afterwards. And the book ends with the very entertaining story of the leadership election, which, as ever with Boris Johnson, the stuff behind the scenes in his campaign is sort of extraordinary. Here's this guy who's brilliant at politics and he's kind of barreling to an almost inevitable victory, but he's got about 6 different people writing his Brexit policy. He's having rows with his girlfriend, who then went on to be his wife. He's got people telling him to ditch her, and he's got meetings, that are quite extraordinary, where nobody seems to know what they're doing. He appoints about 5 different people to run the campaign, and on one occasion, Ian Duncan Smith, who'd been made chairman of the campaign, turns up saying, "Well, now that I'm in charge, I better come and have a meeting." And Johnson didn't want him in charge at all, really.
Of course he didn't. Well, listen, let's get a plug in for the book one more time. Tim, I really enjoyed the first 2 volumes. The latest is out now, No Way Out: From the Backstop to Boris, by Tim Shipman. Treat yourself. A cracking read, no doubt. Thanks, Tim. Next up, the Rwanda plan. Is it already working? That's my take at 10. See you in 5.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We hold on to rather mixed weather conditions across the UK during the week ahead. Rain at times, but temperatures will also be on the rise. At the moment, low pressure's in charge, sitting out towards the east of the UK. This weather front bringing outbreaks of rain towards the northeast of the UK, coupled with fairly brisk winds too. And certainly as we head through the evening, a pretty wet end to the day across the far northeast of Scotland. And we do hold on to outbreaks of rain across the Northern Isles through the night. Elsewhere there'll be some clear spells, but notice showers moving in from the west, starting to give way to some more persistent rain across the far west of the UK by the morning on Monday. Temperatures will turn quite chilly under the clear slots towards the north and east. We could see a touch of frost briefly, but elsewhere it's a relatively mild night. As we go into Monday, we'll see an east-west split, outbreaks of rain in the west, moving in across northern areas during the day too, whereas out towards the east and southeast we'll see the best of the dry and often fairly sunny weather. And in the sunshine, it will be warmer than in recent days, up to 16 or 17 degrees, held back a little bit towards the north and northwest with those showers at 12 or 13 Celsius. On Tuesday, we'll see further outbreaks of rain out towards the west. Again, some of that could be quite hefty in nature. Further east, there'll be some sunshine and just 1 or 2 showers, particularly across the east and southeast of England. And again, those temperatures will be a little bit higher still. Could see high teens in a few spots. It does stay quite changeable weather-wise for the rest of the week, but notice those temperatures hold up too. Could see 19 or 20 degrees in a few spots, certainly from Wednesday onwards. That's it from me. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We've blown the budget by giving you the chance to win a totally terrific £20,000 in tax-free cash to make your summer spectacular. You could use that cash to splash out on a holiday, make the garden glam, buy a new car, or just save it for a rainy day. Whatever you'd spend £20,000 on, make sure you don't miss the chance to make it yours. For a chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel. And from Thursday the 2nd of May,
the people decide.
As the country heads to the polls in a rush of elections.
We'll take you through the night as the first results come in.
And we'll pick up at breakfast
with the very best guests and analysis.
And on the weekend, the results won't stop, and neither will we.
We'll explore what it all means for you as we look ahead to the general election.
Continuing coverage live from Thursday the 2nd of May at midnight on GB News.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
It's 10 o'clock on television, on radio and online in the United Kingdom and across the world. This is Mark Dolan Tonight. In my take at 10, the Rwanda plan hasn't even started yet, but is already working, with politicians in Dublin complaining that migrants are flocking to Ireland to avoid deportation from the UK. Will the government stop the boats after all, and should there be a cap of migrants per year of 100,000? As the Sunday Times report, the Tory rebels are planning an extraordinary political coup. Could Rishi Sunak be gone after a predicted annihilation in this week's local elections? Has Rishi Sunak got days left? And does the SNP meltdown prove that the dream of Scottish independence is gone forever? I'll be asking tonight's newsmaker, the formidable Anne Widdecombe. Plus, tomorrow's newspaper front pages and live reaction in the studio from tonight's top pundits. Back to me, Josh, if you would, because let me tell you, a story we're going to cover at 10:45 in the papers is just developing in the Telegraph. It's an extraordinary headline. It relates to the national state broadcaster. It relates to one Hugh Edwards. Now, I got dog's abuse for going after that story 9 months ago. I got dog's abuse again for talking about the fact that he's been on full pay, £300,000 for doing no work at our expense. Well, here's the latest from tomorrow's Telegraph. BBC warned Hugh Edwards to stop messaging a woman 3 years ago. It's an extraordinary story and one that's not going away. It's getting worse for the organisation. We'll discuss that at 10:45. So a packed show, lots to get through. But don't forget my Take at 10 is coming. But first, the headlines and Ray Addison.
Thanks, Mark. Good evening to you. Our top stories this hour. A government source has told GB News that the UK will not accept migrants back from Ireland as the diplomatic row deepens. According to that source, that position will remain until the EU accepts that we can send them back to France. The Irish government claims the number of migrants crossing into Ireland from Northern Ireland is now higher than 80%. Earlier, the Irish Premier said that Ireland would put plans to Cabinet to introduce a new returns policy. Well, meanwhile, Labour says that Rishi Sunak needs to wake up and realise that his migration plan is not working. That's after Home Office figures show that more than 7,000 people have arrived illegally by small boats so far this year. Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnock says Labour will make sure that those with no right to be in the United Kingdom are swiftly returned. Former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick is calling for a cap on net migration, saying it's the only way to restore voters' trust. Jenrick says he wants a far more restrictive system, allowing less than 100,000 people a year. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, he said the government's recently passed Rwanda bill will join the graveyard of policies that failed to tackle illegal migration.
30 years, politicians of all stripes have promised controlled and reduced immigration, only to deliver the opposite. And the public are rightly furious at what's happened. It's placed immense strain on housing, on public services, on community cohesion.
The Shadow Health Secretary says Dr Dan Poulter has not been offered a peerage to defect from the Tory party to Labour. Wes Streeting is defending Dr Poulter's decision, saying it shows only Sir Keir Starmer can be trusted with the NHS. Dr Poulter says he'll sit on the Labour benches until the general election and then stand down. It comes just days before local elections across England and Wales, and the PM, earlier on today, refused to rule out a general election in July. The Alba Party has been placed on an election footing as motions of no confidence in Scotland's First Minister make a general election there look increasingly likely. Their only MSP, Ash Regan, hasn't confirmed if she'll support Humza Yousaf, but it's thought that her vote could be crucial. Mr Yousaf is asking leaders of rival parties to find common ground. That's after the collapse of the SNP's power-sharing deal with the Greens. And more human remains have been found in 2 locations in Greater Manchester weeks after the discovery of a torso in a Salford nature reserve. The new body parts were found by officers at Blackleach Reservoir and a dog walker at Linnyshaw Colliery Wood, both in Salford. Police say they believe the victim was a man in his 60s. 2 men were arrested on suspicion of murder on Thursday. They remain in police custody. Right, for the latest stories, why not sign up to GB News Alerts? How do you do that? Scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Back now to Mark.
My thanks to Ray Addison, who returns in an hour's time. Welcome to a busy Mark Dolan tonight, as the Sunday Times report that Tory rebels are planning an extraordinary political coup. Could Rishi Sunak be gone after a predicted annihilation in this week's local elections? And does the SNP meltdown that you've just been hearing about prove that the dream of Scottish independence is dead and buried? I'll be asking tonight's newsmaker, Anne Widdicombe. Plus, tomorrow's newspaper front pages and live reaction in the studio from my top pundits. Plus, the Hugh Edwards crisis at the BBC deepens, with the papers today reporting that the corporation was warned about their highest paid newsreader and his conduct 2 years before the scandal that saw him leave. More on a shocking story that won't go away before the end of the show. Reacting to the big stories of the day, former Conservative MP and farmer Neil Parish. A brand new star on Mark Dolan tonight, Communications Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Reem Ibrahim. And GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. A packed hour, those papers are coming, and the Hugh Edwards scandal that won't go away. But first, my take at 10. Strap yourselves in whilst I have a go at the Irish. I'm a Dolan, so it's allowed. Politicians in Dublin spat out their Guinness this week when they discovered that the UK government's Rwanda plan is causing hundreds of migrants to head for Ireland instead of the UK. Ireland's Deputy Prime Minister, Micheál Martin, has said the Rwanda bill was already affecting Ireland, with illegal migrants fearful of staying in the UK. I'm so confused. I thought the Rwanda plan was an expensive white elephant. It's cost millions, but sounds like good value already. A policy so effective, it's working before it's begun. The Irish government are now saying that migrants should be staying in the first safe country in which they arrive. Well, we agree. But tell that to France and their President Emmanuel Macron, who has been raging about the Rwanda plan, saying it's a betrayal of European values. Well, Mr. Macron, I'd say that open borders are a betrayal of European values. And as the French Navy effectively escorts illegal migrants across the Channel into Britain, I'd say that your actions are a betrayal of the millions of pounds that we've given you to stop the boats. Meanwhile, no-nonsense Ryanair boss Michael O'Leary has annoyed woke progressives, who luckily can't afford to fly anyway, by saying that he will happily take the government contract to transport migrants to Rwanda. Fair enough, but I do wonder whether subjecting innocent human beings to the Ryanair food menu, the garish blue and white colour scheme, and £6.50 for a cup of tea is a bit harsh. Now, whilst the illegal crossings are an economic, humanitarian and national security disaster and enrich heartless human traffickers, they are not the whole story, or even the biggest part of it. The elephant in the room is legal net migration, currently running at around 700,000 a year. 700,000 a year. A recent poll suggested the public thought it was 70,000 a year. It's 10 times that. The impact on the welfare budget and the NHS and on our transport and housing infrastructure is clearly unsustainable. For example, you would need to build 500,000 houses every year for the next 10 years just to keep up with current levels of migration, and we build a fraction of that, with the millions of Brits who already live here struggling to find accommodation. Which is why, writing in the Telegraph newspaper today, former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick has said that current immigration levels are 2 fingers up to the electorate. In a report published by the Centre for Policy Studies, Jenrick argues that the idea that immigration is a net benefit to the economy and that our public services would collapse without it is a myth that needs debunking. He writes, "It stands to reason that if all this migration is rocket fuel for our economy, growth would be booming and wages rising. But since 1998, the first year net migration passed 100,000 GDP per capita growth has averaged 1.2% a year, barely half the rate in the 4 decades before that. Now, Genric is proposing a vote in the House of Commons to introduce a migration cap, which would serve as a democratic lock on numbers. Who could argue with that when the public were not consulted about the numbers now involved, which are impacting people's ability to get a GP appointment, a school place, and a flat or house to live in? Genric is suggesting a maximum figure of 100,000 per year or lower. Progressives in the media and in politics, we know who they are, who support a relaxed border policy, should ask themselves how it helps the poorest in our society to have legal net migration amounting to the size of a major British city every year. And how does it help poor Brits living in grinding poverty when £8 million a day is diverted to hotel accommodation for people who have entered the country illegally? Make it make sense. Immigration is a good thing. My parents were Irish immigrants. It's likely that many of you watching this programme or listening tonight have come from somewhere else at some point in the last few hundred years. Look at our own Prime Minister, love him or loathe him. He is a great British success story. Britain has always been a global magnet for the best people, and it's the most successful melting pot society in the world. But this is about the scale of change. When it comes to immigration, the dosage is the poison. And current sky-high levels not only threaten our infrastructure, our economy and potentially our national security, but they threaten integration too. Immigration is of incredibly high value to this nation, but it has to happen at a sensible pace, in an orderly way, with people coming to the UK to become British, to offer skills and not to become siloed in parallel communities without even a grasp of the language. The Rwanda plan, against all odds, may work, but that's only the beginning of the task that lies ahead. So with Dublin up in arms, is the Rwanda plan already working? And should there be a cap, a net migration cap per year, debated in Parliament, voted on in Parliament? 100,000 people a year, less than that, the tens of thousands? Let me know your thoughts. gbnews.com/your say. I'll get to your views in just a moment, but first, tonight's top pundits. Former Conservative MP and farmer Neil Parish, Communications Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Reem Ibrahim, and GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. Nigel, Rwanda plan, it's already working.
No. I do think there's a certain irony in people saying we won't take anyone back from Ireland. They're the same people saying that France must take people back. One wonders where France would actually send them to if they did get them back. Rwanda is not working. We've just seen in every news bulletin on GB News today that the cross-channel boats are still coming at a huge rate. 900 people arrived last week. We've got the highest number of cross-channel migrants in the first 4 months of this year that we've seen so far. Now, if Rwanda was working, they would have been deterred. What it's not doing is acting as a deterrent, and yet the taxpayer has been asked to pick up half a billion pounds for this project. That works out about £1.6 million per migrant, which means we could keep them in a hotel for 30 years.
But Nigel, why are migrants flocking to Ireland? Are you calling the Deputy Prime Minister a liar?
No, I mean, initially I thought he might be trying to shift a bit of blame because they have their own problem with immigration. There is some evidence now that a number of people are going there to definitely dodge Rwanda, but people who are living in this country and dodging going to Rwanda is not the same as stopping people coming across in the boats, which is the whole point of the policy. And at the moment, the policy would only catch 1 in 100 of those people coming across.
Reem, I think that the Rwanda plan has been given a new lease of life. I think it's been given The kiss of life, what do you think?
Well, look, I mean, many people across the country will be thinking the same thing, and I suspect the Conservative Party and Rishi Sunak want people to think that the Rwanda policy is working, and that's why we see these news headlines. It's why we see many Conservative ministers coming out and saying, well, look how successful it really is. But the reality is that not one migrant has gone on a plane to Rwanda, not one migrant has actually been shipped off there, and not one migrant has actually been able to take advantage of that scheme, whether that be the voluntary scheme in which you get £3,000 if you voluntarily choose to go to Rwanda, or indeed the plan that was voted on this week and passed into legislation that effectively means that we're going to be sending those people away if they are indeed getting their applications processed. So again, I think it's politically really interesting. I think that the Rwanda policy is a bit gimmicky. I think Rishi Sunak wants to see a photograph of an illegal migrant on a plane off to Rwanda to use in the election campaign this year.
I hear what you're saying, Reem Ibrahim, but Neil Parish sounds like more than a gimmick if you ask the Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Ireland. He has name-checked the Rwanda plan multiple times this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit ironic when you've got the EU not taking back migrants from the UK, and now the Republic of Ireland, which is very much a member of the EU, now saying Britain must take them back. And I think the Rwanda plan, I've been sceptical over the years on it, but I think the fact that it doesn't really matter that it may be only 1 or 2% that actually get sent to Rwanda, the individual migrants won't actually know who that's going to be. And so, therefore, I think you'll find it will act as a deterrent. And we don't want people getting in boats, we don't want them drowning in the Channel, and we don't want them using good money to get over here. Because a lot of them are economic migrants, and I think those are the ones that are not going to want to go to Rwanda in particular.
I think the Rwanda plan ain't perfect, but the Deputy Prime Minister of Ireland certainly thinks it's an issue and it's having an impact already on the behaviour of migrants. I think it affects the business model of these dreadful people traffickers. Look, I've only got a couple of seconds because Anne Widdecombe is waiting in the wings, and health hath no fury like a former Home Office minister. So can I very briefly ask you, Robert Jenrick has suggested a cap per year on the number of legal net migrants coming into the country. It's currently around 700,000. He's suggesting 100,000 or less. Can I get a figure from each of you? Neil Parish, what's a correct number of people who should enter the country legally every year?
I would reduce it, but I wouldn't go over 100,000 because no government's ever hit a target. And also, we've got to get our 9 million uneconomic, are not working in this country.
Can I have a number?
To work. Otherwise, we will still get net migration because we need them to run the social services.
Neil, can you offer a number? Can you offer a figure? 150k? 200? What's a good number? What's a good ballpark figure? Neil?
I would say I wouldn't. No, seriously, Mark, I would not put a figure on it because I tell you why. Every government has done this, and every government has missed it. So that's why I would say to you, don't do it.
I don't think any government should be deciding the exact number of migrants. I think it should be about how many businesses want to employ migrants abroad.
OK, so no figure from Reem Ibrahim. What about you, Nigel Nelson?
No figure. Artificial caps are absolutely ludicrous. You take the number of migrants you need, depending on the economic conditions of the time.
Exactly. Well, I'll give you a figure. I'm going to say 200,000, but I think it's very generous. It's a lot higher than the kind of... That's the mean number, far higher than the mean number of recent history, but generous, but more sensible than 700k. There you go. I'm calling it out. What do you think? What's the correct number for legal net migration into the country? gbnews.com/your views. I think that's what it is. I'm getting used. Your say. There you go. gbnews.com/your say. Why do they have to change everything? OK, folks, next up, Anne Widdecombe. We're going to talk about Rishi Sunak. Could he be gone by next week? See you in 2.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
This new hate crime bill on women's issues, you think this is the least funny April Fool's joke in history?
Yeah, although the Scottish Government and the Scottish Police do seem to be trying to make a bit of a joke of it when, their campaign Hate Hurts is fronted by a hate monster who's a sort of cuddly, bright red Muppet-style thing. And some of the things that Humza Yousaf said about it were from a soft play centre over the weekend. But yeah, it's really not a joke. It's not actually clever lawyers who know the wording of the law who enforce the law. It's the police. And the police have basically not been trained on this at all. There's a 2-hour online training course they're meant to have done, and lots of them haven't already done it. And we know from the way that the police have been talking about it that they're wildly overstretching what it might actually be to be, in particular, abusive, which is one of the words in the new law, and specifically on the issue of transgender identity. To claim that just noticing the fact that there are two sexes and that sex can't change is meant to be hateful, that, even after years of trying to study it, I can't understand why people hold this belief. But it's part and parcel of a pattern of legal measures that the Scottish Government has either introduced or has sought to introduce. So it tried to introduce gender self-ID, but that was overruled by Westminster because it was out of the power of the devolved government. It's still attempting to bring in a conversion therapy law, which sounds nice but isn't nice. It actually criminalises proper ethical treatment of gender-confused youngsters. They're trying to say that men who have certificates saying that they're women count as women for a particular measure to do with public boards. And then this hate crime law, which tries to make it really difficult for someone to talk in a factual, reality-based, clear, understandable way about all these measures. It all adds up to a sort of an authoritarian attempt to deny the fact that human beings are mammals and come in two sexes, and that recognising that matters for women's rights especially.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people. To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Couple of very quick comments on the message board at gbnews.com/your views, your say. There you go. gbnews.com/your say. And Reeb says, Mark, because I've got a very important question. What is the correct number for legal migrants into the country? What is the correct annual figure? Reeb says if they can't hit a target, then definitely go lower, not higher. 50k. If you want a number of immigrants, says Janice, I'll put a figure on it. 0. Robert Jenrick, says Fiona, is spot on, but the immigration problem should have been sorted out years ago. Theresa May did nothing. Boris let hundreds of thousands of migrants into the UK, and Dishi Rishi is still trying to figure it out. The net migration per year should be 0 squared. Problem solved, says Tony. And Adrian, who is a GB News member, says 0 legal migration. We have enough already. OK, folks, I'll get to more of your thoughts shortly. But the Sunday Times report, the Tory rebels have drawn up plans for a 100-day policy blitz in an attempt to turn around the Conservative Party's fortunes as they intensify efforts to remove Rishi Sunak from office. The Prime Minister is facing one of the most testing weeks of his premiership as the party prepares for a hugely challenging set of local election results on Thursday. This, of course, following the defection of Dr Dan Poulter, a former Tory minister, to the Labour Party. So could Rishi Sunak be gone in weeks, with a new Tory leader offering a more conservative policy agenda? Let's get the views of tonight's newsmaker, Anne Widdecombe. Anne, great to see you as always. As a former long-standing Conservative MP yourself, you know how this party ticks. Do you think the knife will be wielded after this week's local elections?
Well, normally I would say to you, no, of course not. Don't be silly. They would be absolutely mad to have yet another leadership bugbear. That is what I would normally say. But the fact is they have proved that they don't act in the same way, that they're perfectly capable of doing that. And therefore, if you want me to say, no, there are no circumstances under which they would wield the knife, I can no longer say it. I mean, I think it is completely irrational. They're not going to change their fortunes by changing their leader yet again. Nobody's going to be taken in by a whole set of policy initiatives just before a general election. And so my answer is, if they're saying they won't, but they're not saying.
And if you were on the Conservative backbenches, would you vote for an alternative to Rishi Sunak? Would you chuck him out?
Yeah, if I were on the Conservative backbenches, the last thing I would be advocating now would be yet another change of leader. I would be advocating that we actually, do something, or that they rather, because it's not we, that they would actually do something that would make people believe that they really do have something new that they can do quickly. They can't do any of that. They've presided over record high taxes, record immigration, record knife crime, record everything that you look at. And they're going to pull something out of the hat now. And if I were a Conservative backbencher, thank heaven I'm not, I think maybe I'd just be looking for my P45.
Now, Anne, we've sparked quite a debate on the message board regarding what a correct number for legal net migration would be into this country every year. It's running at around 700,000 at the moment, which is a major British city, the equivalent of. And I've been asking my viewers and listeners what they think a good number would be annually. Hedgehog says we have too many already. Christopher says 0 mark. Then business over here will be forced to pay a decent wage, and there'll be plenty of jobs for the scrounging plebs to fill as the dole will be stopped. What do you think is an appropriate figure for legal net migration annually, Anne?
I'm going to be just as boring as your panel were just now and say that
Anne, you're not boring. You don't have a boring bone in your body.
I'm going to give you a boring answer at any rate and say that there is no figure that you can just pluck out of the air and say this is the one. But you can certainly apply principles. You can say we mustn't have more coming in than are going out because that increases net migration. You can certainly say we only take certain skills and certain levels of skills, and we're going to jolly well skill our own workforce to do what normally we get immigrants in to do. You can set down principles of that sort, and you can really follow it. But just plucking a number out of the air, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, if somebody says, I want 200,000, I would say to you, well, hang on, what skills are those 200,000 going to bring? Where do you want them from? And it's just a nonsense.
Except it's a line in the sand. That's the idea of Robert Jenrick. He's suggesting 100,000, Anne. The figure is too high at the moment. If you don't pluck out a figure, then it's always a moving set of goalposts.
Yes, the figure is far too high because legal immigration is not being controlled. But as I say, I wouldn't seek to control it through a figure, other than saying fewer must come in than go out, so that you're getting migration down gradually. Other than saying that, I would simply say you need to decide what and who and on what terms you are going to let people in. The number of students, for example, coming in from abroad. Well, if some of our universities have to go bust as a result of putting a limit on that, then so be it. There are things you can do, but don't just pluck out a number and say, well, forget this number, we've succeeded, because you might have got all the wrong people in.
Anne, a truncated and curtailed appearance tonight. We'll do longer next week. Always the highlight of Mark Dolan tonight on a Sunday. My thanks to former Government Minister Anne Widdecombe. It is a busy show, lots more to get through. We've got the papers coming up, which, of course, are full of lots of different stories, including an ongoing crisis for Rishi Sunak, a possible political coup that could see him ousted as Prime Minister and leader of his party. And how about this in tomorrow's Telegraph? BBC warned Hugh Edwards to stop messaging a woman 3 years ago. We'll tackle all of that in the next 30 minutes. Papers are next with the pundits. See you in 2.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We hold on to rather mixed weather conditions across the UK during the week ahead. Rain at times, but temperatures will also be on the rise. At the moment, low pressure's in charge, sitting out towards the east of the UK. This weather front bringing outbreaks of rain towards the northeast of the UK, coupled with fairly brisk winds too. And certainly as we head through the evening, a pretty wet end to the day across the far northeast of Scotland. And we do hold on to outbreaks of rain across the Northern Isles through the night. Elsewhere there'll be some clear spells, but notice showers moving in from the west, starting to give way to some more persistent rain across the far west of the UK by the morning on Monday. Temperatures will turn quite chilly under the clear slots towards the north and east. We could see a touch of frost briefly, but elsewhere it's a relatively mild night. As we go into Monday, we'll see an east-west split, outbreaks of rain in the west, moving in across northern areas during the day too, whereas out towards the east and southeast we'll see the best of the dry and often fairly sunny weather. And in the sunshine, it will be warmer than in recent days, up to 16 or 17 degrees, held back a little bit towards the north and northwest with those showers at 12 or 13 Celsius. On Tuesday, we'll see further outbreaks of rain out towards the west. Again, some of that could be quite hefty in nature. Further east, there'll be some sunshine and just 1 or 2 showers, particularly across the east and southeast of England. And again, those temperatures will be a little bit higher still. Could see high teens in a few spots. It does stay quite changeable weather-wise for the rest of the week, but notice those temperatures hold up too. Could see 19 or 20 degrees in a few spots, certainly from Wednesday onwards. That's it from me. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people. To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News. The People's Channel.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
OK, it's 10:30, so time for tomorrow's front pages. If I've given you a fright, just after 10:30, 10:32, and Metro, bitter harvest to hit the UK in the pocket. Prices coming a cropper. Pubs and shoppers have been told to brace themselves for price rises after severe autumn and winter rain has slashed harvest forecasts. It means that biscuits and beer and bread will go up in price. Bad news all round. The Daily Star now, 21 degrees centigrade plume from Germany. Oompa, oompa, take off jumpers. This is the Daily Star in the usual irreverent tone. Swap your strides for lederhosen. Britain is set for a bank holiday heatwave thanks to a 300-mile plume coming from Berlin. Dankeschön. The Sun now, Gogglebox exclusive. Linda reveals last call from tragic George. I love you, mum. Gogglebox favourite George Gilby's devastated mum spoke of his passing and how much he is missed. I interviewed him once on the radio. What a gent. The I newspaper now. Sunak to resist early election as Tory rebels on manoeuvres. Guardian, Home Office to detain UK asylum seekers in shock Rwanda move. The Home Office will launch a major operation to detain asylum seekers across Britain weeks earlier than expected. It's going to start tomorrow in preparation for their deportation to Rwanda. Officials plan to hold refugees who turn up for routine meetings at immigration service offices or bail appointments, and will also pick people up nationwide in a surprise 2-week exercise. Refugee rights campaigners and lawyers said the detentions risk provoking long legal battles, community protests and clashes with police. Fears for economy if water firm collapses. Senior Whitehall officials fear that Thames Water's financial collapse could trigger a rise in government borrowing costs not seen since the chaos of the Liz Truss mini-budget. Diabetes care hit by insulin shortages is the other story. Daily Mail. Tens of thousands exploiting hidden asylum loophole. Foreign nationals allowed into the UK on time-limited visas are then lodging claims to stay indefinitely. And Harry is back in Britain next week, but will he see his father? Daily Mirror now, election date demand. Time is up, Mr Sunak. PM dodges question 5 times as pressure grows to name the day. The Times, depressed and anxious, face losing their benefits. And Irish seek to return migrants fleeing the UK. And last but not least for now, the Daily Express. Dame Esther, I'm fighting for my family and a lot of others. This is in regards to her wish to have the option of assisted dying. OK, let's get reaction to those headlines from tonight's top pundits. Former Conservative MP Neil Parish, Communications Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs, Reem Ibrahim, and GB News' senior political commentator, Nigel Nelson. Right, lots of stories to sink our teeth into. And how about this one, Neil Parish? Sunak to resist early election as Tory rebels on manoeuvres. Do you think a July poll is unlikely?
I think it's unlikely, but it could happen if they decide to get enough, the 52 letters in and run a campaign against Rishi Sunak. His option, of course, is to call a general election. I suspect in the end there won't amount to that number. It's interesting how they're running Penny Mordaunt as the new leader when Penny Mordaunt doesn't seem to be overly keen. I mean, if you, being perfectly blunt, if you were Penny Mordaunt or anybody else, would you actually take up a basket case at this particular time? Because whoever the leader of the Tory party is, dare I say it, is not going to make a lot of difference now, because it's about the Tory party and it's about coming together. And actually, if the economy has returned to some sort of reasonable position, fight the election and see what happens. This idea of changing a leader all the time won't work, but of course there'll be huge pressure if lots of councillors lose their seats. Because, I mean, I was in local government and I lost my seat in 93 on the district council and 95 on the county council. And I was told at the time, we like you, Neil, but we are not voting Conservative. You see, so a lot of councillors will be very upset that they will be thrown out because of the situation in Westminster, not because most Tory councils are actually pretty well run. The problem is a lot of them will be sacrificial lamb with the way things are, and there will be a lot of pressure on Rishi Sunak and the government when this happens.
Nigel Nelson, could Rishi Sunak be gone in a couple of months?
It's always possible, but I go along with everything that Neil's just said. Unless the Tory party panic, which is not impossible because they are so desperate at the moment, and they try and get rid of Rishi Sunak, if they do try and get rid of him, we could end up with a June election, because he would have to call it pretty much next week after the local elections. I don't think Penny Mordaunt's actually in the frame. I think what she wants to do is be leader of the opposition. That's what she's lining herself up for. Weirdly, I think that Dan Poulter's defection was a score draw for Rishi Sunak. Bad look to have an NHS doctor quitting because the Tories can't run the NHS. But it does make those who are thinking of a leadership challenge think again, because how many others might defect because they don't want a right-winger in?
OK, Reem.
I think it's a really interesting point from the both of you, because I think what's interesting about the internal politics within the Conservative Party is that many of the potential leadership candidates want to be leader after the election, not before. They don't want to be responsible for what is going to be expectedly a Labour landslide. I think on this point about the timing of the election, so on the front page of the Eye, they're saying that nearly half of UK voters want an election before October. This is a poll that was done by the Eye. But actually, we've also got to remember the timing and the finances. In October, you've got Conservative Party conference, which is a huge revenue raiser for the Conservative Party. And a lot of that money is used to fight the election. So I think we've got to think about the timing in that respect as well, because where is a lot of that money going to come from? Both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party will want the party conference season to happen before the election.
That makes it November the 14th, then.
My money would be on the middle of
And the
November.
Sun's Trevor Kavanagh suggested the same to me last night.
Yes.
And, what he doesn't know about politics ain't worth knowing, Neil.
And I think they will huff and they will puff, but I don't think they'll blow the house down. No. And I think Rishi Sunak will be there still after these local elections, but it's going to be a pretty rocky time.
Fears for the economy, Reem, if water firm collapses. Senior Whitehall officials fear that Thames Water's financial collapse could trigger a rise in government borrowing. Are you concerned about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. They're saying that it could be a larger increase than we saw after Liz Truss's mini-budget, which is, again, huge. I mean, what's interesting about the fact that Thames Water has failed time and time again is that they are a private monopoly. And this comes as a result of the difficulties that come with privatisation processes. It isn't privatisation itself, it's the fact that the government created a monopoly and then sold it to the private sector, so it remained a private monopoly, and people don't have choice. This is very scary, and I think it comes as the problem when it comes to those processes. If it does happen, it's pretty difficult, again, within the wider economy, but also the cost of borrowing for the government, and that's really where the problem is. That wiggle room that the Chancellor continuously talks about potentially would actually reduce the chances for new tax cuts this year.
You see, a huge amount of borrowing will be required if you brought Thames Water into state ownership. I still think greater pressure needs to be put on the company to raise that money and to sort itself out. I mean, over the years, they paid too much to their shareholders and not spent enough on their infrastructure. I mean, in fairness to Thames Water, they have some of the oldest infrastructure in the land because
they've pumped tens of billions into the infrastructure over the years.
And of course,
which the government couldn't have done if they were responsible.
And pumps a lot of sewage and waters as well.
Yeah, but the Thames Tunnel, which they have spent a lot of money on, it will actually solve a lot of the problems with sewage in and around our rivers around London. But I think nationalising it will just bring about a whole lot of new public debt.
Nigel, we need to fix, Neil, your microphone, which is in and out.
Right.
You can take over, Nigel.
The point about nationalisation, I think public services and public utilities should be in public control.
Yeah.
The point of nationalising it would be that money that was going into shareholders' pockets would go into investing in the industry. I do take Reem's point. It would be expensive. It's not like the railways with no or few upfront costs, but this
Reem,
would be.
You're shaking your head before I come back to Neil.
The reason why we want privatisation and the reason why privatisation is important is because it's handing back control to consumers, to people. Now, I take your point. I actually think
that the shareholders get it.
Well, exactly. With regards to Thames Water, there hasn't been the two elements of privatisation. You get choice with consumers and you get competition. We have none of those things when it comes to Thames Water because the government created a public monopoly.
But don't you think that infrastructure like water should always be in state hands?
No, absolutely not. And actually, there's no reason why governments can handle it better.
That keep these things in public control because I don't see why profits should be hived off.
Public control. They're in politicians' control.
But also, you only have to look at the history of the water companies, that when they were actually privatised, they were in a terrible state. For the simple reason that when you've got everything nationalised, when it comes to health, education, police, defence, you'll find that water is not top priority. And so, therefore, you'll find that if we'd actually had competition, I think where we went wrong was we did not use Ofwat enough to actually...
I think we have an ideological divide here.
Exactly, we've definitely got a divide because I think you'll find that just adding that amount of borrowing to the public debt at this stage would be crazy.
And profit is not a bad thing. I mean, we use it negatively and we think about all these shareholders are increasing their own particular wages. Profit is a good thing. The profit incentive is a good thing because it incentivises people to do good things and to innovate.
But not when it doesn't work.
Well, at the moment it's not working because the government have created a monopoly. I think governments have the propensity to do more harm than good, and this is an excellent example of that.
Profit works in the NHS, where you can tender for outside companies to do the work that previously was in-house, cheaper, and they do a better job.
Yeah, I mean, I've got nothing against shopping around, which is what the NHS does, but the NHS is still a public service in public control.
And it shouldn't be.
Listen, Reem, a quick one, only a few seconds, but a story that you've picked out in The Telegraph. Tory critics urge Sunak to promote right-wingers to an election war cabinet. What do you make of that story?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So it names people like Priti Patel, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Robert Jenrick, putting forward their names as contentions in order to be at the front line of the cabinet. They call it the election war cabinet, the election this year. I think it's interesting because there is a huge ideological divide within the Conservative Party, and it's about whether or not actually promoting the more right-wing candidates within the Conservative Party to the front benches would actually save Sunak some face.
Fascinating stuff. Well, look, lots more to come from tomorrow's newspaper front pages. And what about this? The Hugh Edwards crisis at the BBC deepens, with the papers reporting that the corporation was warned about their highest-paid newsreaders' conduct 2 years before the scandal that saw him leave. What about this headline in tomorrow's Telegraph? You won't believe your ears. The BBC warned Hugh Edwards to stop messaging one particular woman 3 years ago. What a shambles. We'll dig into that scandal next.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
J.K. Rowling has accused politicians of snuggling up to trans campaigners. The Harry Potter author has called for an investigation into why political parties are embracing the language of pro-trans groups. So is it time to ditch campaign groups such as those? Well, welcome again to my clashers, former Labour Party advisor Matthew Laza, also businessman and activist Adam Brooks.
I think the Cass report is really welcome. I think there's been a huge amount of agreement, including from some trans rights campaigners, that there's an awful lot of good in the Cass report. I think that I'm more concerned about mermaids, which is currently under a Charity Commission investigation, and some of the reports, if they're to be believed, like sending out chest binders, are more alarming. I think on Stonewall, which has done such great work over the past 30 years on LGBT rights.
It said 2-year-olds could be trans. Now, that is one of the most horrifying things I read today. Actually, J.K. Rowling tweeted that out there. To say that a 2-year-old can think that they can be another gender when my 4-year-old still thinks she's Elsa on some days. You know, there's no common sense, and to me it's
very badly phrased, Adam, I agree.
It's very sinister that these people actually believe that these kids want to change gender, and unfortunately out there are parents that almost see a trans kid as a fashion accessory now, and I think this whole agenda has pushed on people that this is normal to change gender, and we have to push back. And as I said earlier, to be trans is not normal.
Well, I don't agree with that phrasing. I think it's a big step, Adam, but there are clearly people throughout history who have been
But it's
trans.
not normal behaviour, is it?
I think as far as children are concerned, children need to be given the space to explore the world, and that can include experimenting with, breaking previous gender stereotypes. That doesn't mean that people should be sort of labelled at the age of 2, which I completely disagree with.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Martin Daubney. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's been a busy day and a busy show. Thanks to my brand new team today. We had Bobby and Adam, who've done a great job, and also well done to Josh in the gallery, Joe on digital, and Darren in MCR as well, who we poached from Arrival down the road. Listen, lots more stories to get through, and we've got to talk about Hugh Edwards. It's an issue, a scandal that was covered on this programme by me, dating back to July of last year. People said, why are you debating this? Innocent till proven guilty, all of that. Well, he's left the organisation with his tail between his legs. No thank you from his former employers for your years of service, but more questions that remain unanswered. A big development in tomorrow's Telegraph newspaper. Let me give you the headline. The BBC warned Hugh Edwards to stop messaging women 3 years ago. That's right. BBC say the Telegraph warned Hugh Edwards to stop messaging a woman 2 years before the scandal that resulted in his departure from the corporation. The former newsreader, who resigned last week on medical grounds, was spoken to by managers in 2021 after receiving a complaint from a woman with whom he'd been in regular contact. She requested that the BBC intervened to halt the contact, and Edwards was informed about the complaint by a manager. Now, these are allegations at this stage. Hugh Edwards is not here to refute these allegations or to defend himself. Plus, he has well-reported mental health issues, and therefore we wish him well and a speedy recovery. That's a serious matter. But, Neil Parish, so is this set of allegations.
Yeah, I mean, I think we do have sympathy with Hugh Edwards with his mental state, but I think the BBC were probably very much wrong in not actually, dare I say it, actually putting more pressure on Hugh at the time. And the fact that Hugh Edwards didn't really take notice of what they were saying, I think is very much, you know, not only just him, but I think the BBC also responsible. And I think, you know, it's a good job now that this has been brought to a head. And I think we do actually still wish Hugh Edwards very well. But I think the BBC needs to learn from this whole episode, however difficult it is. And I think, you know, perhaps, you know, and we can all make mistakes, but I think the problem here is these mistakes seem to have been repeated. But I think we've got to wait, really, in some ways, for all of the proof to come out also, Mark.
Well, indeed, innocent until proven guilty, and Hugh Edwards not here to defend himself, Nigel Nelson. But the Telegraph go on that this woman later retracted the complaint following alleged further contact from Hugh Edwards, but raised concerns with the corporation for a second time in January 2022.
If this is true, it materially changes the whole way that the investigation should go. I was quite happy to see the BBC investigation dropped on Hugh Edwards himself because of his mental health issues, the fact he left the BBC without any payoff. I thought that then the chapter had been closed. If it turns out that a warning was given to Hugh Edwards about contacting a particular woman and he ignored that warning, the big question now is, what did the BBC then do about it? This is now about the BBC. It's about their complaints procedures, their safeguarding procedures, how they handle things and how it progresses from there and what will change.
I think that's absolutely spot on. I think it really is about the BBC at this point. And again, I was the same. I mean, I was very happy for everything to be dropped after he had left. Again, there is a question about whether or not he should have been receiving a salary whilst not working. And I think that does...
Around £320,000 for doing nothing.
Yeah, I mean, that does beg to question the amount of public waste we have across government. But again, this is one particular issue. But again, I mean, if this is to be true, and again, he isn't here to defend himself, and all of these accusations are alleged, if this is true, this does beg to question how the BBC have handled the complaint themselves, but also how many other presenters or public members of staff have actually undergone these kind of criticisms or these kind of allegations and then not been dealt with.
I suspect also there's an issue with the BBC on how big the star is and how big a personality he is. And I think probably in this instance they were probably didn't want to put too much pressure on Hugh Edwards, but probably in hindsight they probably should have done more, and then perhaps it would not have ended where it did. And I think
Hugh Edwards notwithstanding, we do see some of the bigger stars get away with more, don't we, Ibrahim? Whether it's Philip Schofield, allegedly Hugh Edwards, and others.
I mean, others have definitely gotten away with doing far worse, but I don't think it's about that. If this is true and he has been what is effectively continuity messaging, I don't want to use the word harassment because, again, we don't know how true, we don't know what the details are. But if this is the case, and he was told on 2 occasions to stop doing that, and then subsequently saw the further complaint about him potentially giving a large sum of money to a young person for explicit images.
Around £35,000.
If any of this is true, and the sequence of events was known by the BBC and by safeguarding officials at the British Broadcasting Corporation, then we have to take this all into consideration and think about the wider context. Why was this not dealt with before?
Now, the alleged youngster involved in that particular case, the 35 grand for the photos, has said it's rubbish, but the youngster said that through expensive London lawyers. No one knows how this vulnerable youngster paid for those lawyers. I can only imagine. But, Reem, there was the investigation by the BBC themselves on the 6 o'clock news that suggested that several member of staff were not happy with Hugh Edwards' conduct, including messages sent on the phone. Those allegations not denied.
Yes, and I think that's what's really interesting about this. We've got to look at those allegations in the context of the other 2 allegations by that particular woman at the BBC, and also the allegations around the young boy with the £35,000.
That's right. And you see, and I think if this was a more junior member of the team in the BBC, they would have been at least given an official warning, if not actually dispensed with.
We're talking about the man that announced the Queen's death, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
This man is the BBC. If he was sort of invigorated into a human being, it would be Hugh Edwards.
And did a great job in many respects. But I think, you know, what we've got to do now is judge the BBC. Did they act fairly with others as well as with Hugh? And I think that's
OK, brilliant stuff. Well, look, I'm sure that the BBC would be very clear that they followed due procedure and continue to do so, but that story's not going anywhere. Thanks to my brilliant pundits tonight. You for your company. I'll see you Friday at 8. Have a good week. Headliners is next.
Warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, here's your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. We hold on to rather mixed weather conditions across the UK during the week ahead. Rain at times, but temperatures will also be on the rise. At the moment, low pressure's in charge, sitting out towards the east of the UK. This weather front bringing outbreaks of rain towards the northeast of the UK, coupled with fairly brisk winds too. And certainly as we head through the evening, a pretty wet end to the day across the far northeast of Scotland. And we do hold on to outbreaks of rain across the Northern Isles through the night. Elsewhere there'll be some clear spells, but notice showers moving in from the west, starting to give way to some more persistent rain across the far west of the UK by the morning on Monday. Temperatures will turn quite chilly under the clear slots towards the north and east. We could see a touch of frost briefly, but elsewhere it's a relatively mild night. As we go into Monday, we'll see an east-west split, outbreaks of rain in the west, moving in across northern areas during the day too, whereas out towards the east and southeast we'll see the best of the dry and often fairly sunny weather. And in the sunshine, it will be warmer than in recent days, up to 16 or 17 degrees, held back a little bit towards the north and northwest with those showers at 12 or 13 Celsius. On Tuesday, we'll see further outbreaks of rain out towards the west. Again, some of that could be quite hefty in nature. Further east, there'll be some sunshine and just 1 or 2 showers, particularly across the east and southeast of England. And again, those temperatures will be a little bit higher still. Could see high teens in a few spots. It does stay quite changeable weather-wise for the rest of the week, but notice those temperatures hold up too. Could see 19 or 20 degrees in a few spots, certainly from Wednesday onwards. That's it from me. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You really could be our next big winner with an incredible £20,000 in tax-free cash to play with this summer. What would you spend that on? Well, whilst you're thinking about it, listen to some of our previous winners getting that winning phone call from us.
You're the winner of the Great British Giveaway.
I'm slipping neck. Oh dear.
Oh my God, are you joking?
You're joking. Really? Seriously, it's not a line. What is it?
Oh my God, this is amazing. Thank you.
The next winning call could be answered by you. For a chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text WIN to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg's State of the Nation, Monday to Thursday from 8 p.m.
The International Monetary Fund has estimated that Russia will outgrow all advanced economies in 2024. This is in spite of all the sanctions the West has imposed on Russia, in spite of its removal of the SWIFT banking system, in spite of the fact that Germany has almost entirely weaned itself off Russian gas, and in spite of the 50,000 soldiers who have died and the endless resources it has poured into the Ukraine war. So, what are we missing here? Why is Russia going to grow more than the rest of us? Well, it's simple. Russia is willing to make use of its own energy resources to provide abundant supply to its citizens. Increased supply means lower prices, and cheap energy is inextricably linked to economic growth. But since 2008, The United States has grown at twice the rate of the United Kingdom. The big difference is that America has much lower energy prices, while the UK insists on masochistic green policies. But it's no surprise that the green fanatics in the Scottish government, where they know how to be fanatics, have had to backtrack on their flagship greenhouse gas reduction target. The SNP has committed to reducing Scotland's CO2 emissions by 75% by 2030. Now, the Climate Change Committee has reviewed its policy and advised that the absurd reduction target is out of reach.
Can we accept the CCC's recent re-articulation that this Parliament's interim 2030 target is out of reach? We must now act to chart a course to 2045.
It is time to recognise the truth that net zero by 2050 is unrealistic and unaffordable. It's time we rid ourselves of this foolish and costly idea that will simply make people cold and poor. We need to prioritise cheap energy for Britain's consumers and for companies, for industry, enabling economic growth that will benefit us all.
Good evening. The cheeky trio we call our headliners is up next, but first the news headlines with me, Ray Addison. And we start with some news. A government source has told GB News that the UK will not accept migrants back from Ireland as the diplomatic row deepens. According to that source, that position will remain until the EU accepts that we can send them back to France. The Irish government claims the number of migrants crossing into Ireland from Northern Ireland is now higher than 80%. Earlier, the Irish Premier said Ireland would put plans to Cabinet to introduce a new returns policy. Well, meanwhile, Labour says Rishi Sunak needs to wake up and realise that his migration plan is not working. That's after Home Office figures show that more than 7,000 people have arrived illegally by small boats so far this year. Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnock says Labour will make sure that those with no right to be in the United Kingdom are swiftly returned. Former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick is calling for a cap on net migration, saying it's the only way to restore voters' trust. Jenrick says he wants a far more restrictive system, allowing less than 100,000 people a year. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, he said the government's recently passed Rwanda bill will join the graveyard of policies that failed to tackle illegal migration.
Last 30 years, politicians of all stripes have promised controlled and reduced immigration, only to deliver the opposite. And the public are rightly furious at what's happened. It's placed immense strain on housing, on public services, on community cohesion.
Labour is pledging to overhaul the country's mental health services following the defection of Tory MP Dr Dan Poulter. The former health minister and psychiatrist announced that he was crossing the floor on Saturday over the state of the National Health Service. Sir Keir Starmer will tour Dr Poulter's constituency tomorrow. He'll say Labour will inject resource and reform into the way that mental health is approached if they win the next election. The Alba Party has been placed on an election footing as motions of no confidence in Scotland's First Minister make a general election there look increasingly likely. Their only MSP, Ash Regan, hasn't confirmed if she'll support Humza Yousaf, but it's thought that her vote could be crucial. Mr Yousaf is asking leaders of rival parties to find common ground after the collapse of the SNP's power-sharing deal with the Greens. And finally, more human remains have been found in 2 locations in Greater Manchester, weeks after the discovery of a torso in a Salford nature reserve. The new body parts were found by officers at Black